Hello, my name is Felice. I'm a pediatric neuroradiologist at Great Ormond Street Hospital and Evelina Children's Hospital in London. I would like to thank you, the organizer, for the invitation and the European Society of Head and Neck Radiology. I'm going to share my presentation now. And this will be a presentation on congenital head and neck tumors. But before, I would like to start with a basic rule of radiology. Before you start thinking about the diagnosis, you need to get your protocol right. And this is a typical Monday morning in the reporting room. There is a young girl with Ewing sarcoma relapsing. This was the external scan that came to us. They did a brain scan, and you can see the lesion here at the skull base. And then the child came to our hospital for a follow-up scan, and we did a face scan. These are the only two comparable sequences we could find. And of course, we have the, at this point, typical radiology report conclusion. We all have written that once in our life, standing along the line of allowing for technical differences between the scan, blah, 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 not convincing changes noted. And of course, we have no other option that writes something like that. But the consequence of this report is this typical phase of a clinician reading the report. They don't know what to do. So we need standardized protocols that are also flexible and disease specific. And this is why, and I would like to thank the European Society of Head and Neck Radiology for endorsing this paper about magnetic resonance imaging in pediatric head and neck pathologies. So a consensus paper on how to do the protocol right. And in particular, I need to thank Bert DeFore, Stephen Connor, and Davide Farina for their inputs. They are co-authors or collaborators. And part of this, the approach that we gave in this paper is something that is standardized, and this is a typical orbital protocol that includes fat-saturated post-contrast T1. This is a patient with a rhabdomyosarcoma, but also, as you can see here, T1 pre-contrast without fat saturation, so we can use the fat around the lesion as a passive contrast media, but also optional sequences. And I will show the value of optional sequences a bit further down the line in this presentation. But a protocol needs to be also flexible, especially in children. And we know that a child is not a little adult, meaning that children can have specific disease. And this is, for instance, the case of retinoblastoma that typically present with leukocoria. So if we have leukocoria, so a white eye, we have to exclude a retinoblastoma, but also apart from the diagnosis, we need to give some specific information to the clinician. So our basic orbital protocol kind of changes a bit. And how it changes? Well, it depends by what we want to diagnose. First of all, they need to know about the cranial nerves invasion, that's for sure, but also they need to know about the presence of calcification in this lesion that is useful for the differential diagnosis, and also we need to have a look properly to the brain and sometimes the spine, because of course these children can have trilateral retinoblastoma or even leptomeningeal dissemination. And this is why in our consensus paper, we suggested a specific protocol in case of leukocoria, adding specific sagittal oblique along the optic nerves, optional sequences like high resolution sequences, but also some sequences on the brain. So again, standardization, but also flexibility, and also just doing the sequences that are necessary because we have limited time in our daily practice. And just to show you the main differential diagnosis, Coats disease, primary hyperplastic, persistent hyperplastic primary vitreous, and retinopathy of prematurity, all of them do not have calcification early on. So we need to look at the calcification, but we cannot use the CT in children with suspected retinoblastoma. So we can use SWI as an alternative on MRI and ultrasound. Very, very important. And then a second part of this presentation is cases, because cases are more fun, and also from difficult cases we'll learn a lot. And I want to show you some cases, and I will start from key radiological findings. The first one are flow voids. Look at this, large mass with a lot of flow voids, and my fellow told me, can it be an arteriovenous malformation? We have the option in our clinical practice, and we put this in our protocol paper, of doing some optional sequences. So we did an MRI angiography in this case, and what we think it is an hemangioma, a slow flow malformation, or an AVM. Completely different management. Hemangioma, we just wait, or we give propranolol. Slow flow, like venous malformation, venolymphatic malformation, they go to sclerotherapy. AVM need to be embolized because become aggressive over time. So what is in this case? Well, there is a large mass full of flow voids without any shunt demonstrated. So when there is a mass with flow voids, the key radiological finding flow voids, it is the same for hemangioma and AVM, shift your differential toward an hemangioma that will never have a nidus or AV shunt visible, and will never have, and will have a mass. Okay, so when you see mass and flow voids, think hemangioma, and this was a rich. Another case, 1-year-old male with right proptosis from birth, and this MRI showed some flow void, and this is why the radiologists who reported thought this could be an hemangioma, because orbital region is quite typical for an hemangioma. Look at this this orbital sequence. These vessels are very well seen in this FATSA 1 which is not a standard sequence that we use, but in this case, it was helpful to identify the flow void. So we have a lot of flow voids as well. Same key radiological finding. What is your diagnosis this time? Well, if we look at these images again, where is the mass? There is no mass, no discrete homogeneously enhancing mass. This cannot be an hemangioma, and it's very, very important because an AVM is worsening over time in comparison to an hemangioma. And what happened is that this child, we lost a lot of time with this child, and eventually he was operated because the lesion was worsening. So remember, an AVM does have a lot of vessel. Often we can see the nidus and the shunt, but when the lesion is very small, even with a dynamic post-contrast MRA camera, we cannot easily identify the shunt. So remember, use the presence or absence of the mass. And this becomes very aggressive and can be lytic. And this is just a summary slides from Deborah Schatkes that gave me these slides, where basically this slide stresses the element of differential diagnosis. So remember, flow voids are present in hemangioma, AVM, no mass, but worsening over time. Venous malformation, they are not tumor, and they are characterized by phlebolites and also patchy enhancement, lymphatic malformation, multicystic most of the time, fluid level, transfacial. And I showed this because the only one that is a tumor in this group of disease is an hemangioma. The other are vascular malformation. Other tumors that we can encounter are, for instance, the caposiform hemangioendothelioma that typically shows this infiltration of the fat. But remember, the hemangioma is a tumor. So just to recap, what are the radiological characteristics of a hemangioma? It's a well-defined mass, homogeneous intense enhancement, internal flow void, and free diffusion. Also remember the clinical trajectory of an infantile hemangioma normally regresses over time, and some of the congenital hemangioma do the same. Venous malformation, AVM, present at birth, and worsen. I mentioned the hemangioma as free from diffusion, and this brings us to the second radiological key findings, that is DWI signal. Look at this case, another mass, congenital mass in the orbit, but in this case, we have striking low signal, low values in ADC plus metastatic nodes, or what they look like metastatic nodes. Well, this looks much more aggressive than an hemangioma because diffusion means, diffusion restriction means cellularity, and most of the time cellularity means aggressiveness. But we keep looking and we have something else here. Again, a small nodule in the brain, again showing diffusion restriction, but no enhancement. Now, if we consider this to be a tumor and we come from the adult neuroradiology world, a tumor that does not enhance in an adult is most likely either benign or low grade, or is going, maybe can be grade 2, grade 3. But it's very important to consider, and this is my teaching point, that in children, you always trust diffusion first, and diffusion means high cellularity, and such a dark diffusion is typical of embryonal tumor. And this combination of phase findings and the orbital findings and intracranial findings of embryonal looking tumor is typical of a diagnosis that we can do in this case that is both genetic and genetical and histological diagnosis, because the only possibility is an embryonal tumor in the brain, an ATRT, with a malignant rhabdoid tumor in the face. And there is only a group, a small group of genetic abnormality. In this case was SMARC-B1. There are SMARC genetic abnormalities. So this is a case where the combination of two synchronous masses gives us the possibility to have both histological and genetic diagnosis. Very important. So low ADC, trust the ADC first. Low ADC means very cellular. And this just to show you that, again, a lot of intracranial embryonal tumor do not show enhancement and yet are very aggressive. Then we have this other case. Okay, this case is a case of an infant that was born with this mastoid lump, and they thought was a Langerhans cell astrocytosis, LCH, and they came to Gosh for a biopsy. And the ENT surgeon comes down and say, can you show me where to biopsy precisely? And this child, this is a scan done externally. Again, they did not fat saturate the T1, but they did a CT. Actually, this was a CTV, and you can see there was no thrombosis, but there is this permeative aspect of the mastoid when compared with the other side. And this is a case we published in a recent paper in Pitfall in head and neck images in pediatrics with Lorenzo Uga. So what is this? It's a restricting lesion, i.e. embryonal kind of tumor, highly cellular, and showing permeative aspect on CT. An LCH will look like that, extremely lytic. It loves the temporal bone, but LCH looks lytic, not permeative. In this case, the only thing to do is an ultrasound of the abdomen, because the skull vault and skull base are typical location of metastatic neuroblastoma. And this was another case which much more pronounced and multifocal masses. In this case, the child also had orbital and periorbital location, but again, there was at the ultrasound of the abdomen neuroblastoma. So remember all the time to look at the abdomen if you have a finding like that. And also remember the permeative appearances on CT, and this is the other side of the spectrum. LCH was lytic. Look at the fibrous dysplasia, very solid. So again, we have three different appearances on CT. Key radiological findings number 3, the FAT is very important. Look at this case. This is a congenital obstructive mass in the nasopharynx, and this is a medical emergency. But the appearances of CT are fat surrounding something more dense. And when they operated, you see the histology, fat surrounding this fibrous stalk. And if you look at the literature, there is one kind of entity that have exactly these appearances on MRI, CT, and histology. Among these, tergossetal cyst, teratoma, hairy polyp, and dermoid. Of course, teratoma can have fat, but in this case, there was no solid non-fatty lesion. This is a variant of a dermoid, is an hairy polyp, and you can see they normally originate from the Eustachian tube, and they have this this fibrous stalk surrounded by fat, and there is an embryological explanation for that. Don't have time to go into details, but it's very, very important that you remember that once you know your histology, you know how the images look like, and vice versa. Finally, radiological findings, cystic appearance, but these cases will include all the others. Look at this case that we recently published, and this is a fetal scan done at UCLH, large cystic mass. Look at the globe, it's far away from the face because of this large mass. So this was called lymphatic malformation. They follow up the child, and this is the 3D appearance, just to show you how big was the mass done by the physicist at UCLH, Magda Sokolowska. And we did a follow-up, and this is still very cystic, very big, but look, it's developing some solid hypointense areas. So the mass is changing over time. Still, we were not sure. And then at Great Ormond Street, we did a post-contrast scan. The mass shows actually, again, the solid area of T1 hyperintensity and T2 hypointensity. What is this? Is blood, so typical of a lymphatic malformation, or fat that will push the diagnosis somewhere else. So I repeated a scan, and surprisingly, the mass was less cystic, more solid, and I did ad hoc, as an optional sequence, a pre-T1 with fat saturation that showed that this was not blood, was actually fat. And look, you have a solidocystic mass with fat. When you have a solidocystic mass with fat content, there is, in a neonate, a congenital mass, there is only one possibility, it's teratoma. So we had the diagnosis playing a bit with our sequences, but the evolution over time was puzzling. And this is the presence of fat in the middle of a typical solidocystic mass in neonate. And this is the typical appearance of a teratoma. So, and this is again a medical emergency. So what are my tips for the day? Use the right protocol. We did write, with the help and the endorsement of the European Society of Head and Neck Radiology, a protocol consensus paper for head and neck pathologies in children. Please use this protocol, send us feedback. Look for key radiological findings, but expand from that, looking for other elements of differential diagnosis. Ask your clinicians how the lesion looks like or behaves over time. And remember, FAT and DWI are your friends. These are my acknowledgement. And again, I'm a pediatric neuroradiologist with special interest in head and neck. My lectures are on YouTube. So if you are interested in basic lecture for pediatric neuroradiology, about pediatric neuroradiology, please check my YouTube channel. There are also eminent friends and colleagues that put some of their great lectures there. Thank you very much for that. And thank you again for the invitation.